Hello, and welcome to another episode of My02cent. My name is Plum, and I'll be giving you my 2 cents. Today's topic is going to be on the My02cent standard model of the atom. So, let's see. Where do I begin? Obviously, it's been a long time since I made an episode. Life is... I stay pretty busy. I've been spending a lot of time writing as my primary hobby. So, writing fiction and then trying to transition from that to a formal science is a lot more difficult than you would think, because you guys like to scrutinize everything that's put on the internet. So I have to make sure that whatever I put up isn't just the principles that I'm putting out for my 2 cents as a science, not as it's. So science for me is a discipline. It's the way that you deal with the world. If I say that something is a liquid, then I don't get to pseudo change the definition and the properties and behaviors of a liquid to convince myself in trying to understand something liquid-like. This thing that's liquid-like has to either obey all the laws of a liquid, or it has to be acknowledged as not quite being a liquid. To me, that's what science is. A solid is a solid. A liquid is a liquid. A gas is a gas. Ice is frozen water. If I come across a liquid that's frozen, it's not water. If it's not 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, it's something else. If you freeze congealed oil, it's technically frozen oil. It's frozen, lipid molecules. I think that's correct. But the point is that that's what science is for me. We wouldn't say that fat, congealed fat is ice or the equivalents, because we don't want to make the connection between the solid state of a liquid like water and the solid state of a hydrophobic material like lipids. We don't want to. The way that we deal with science doesn't do that. The way that I deal with science does, because that's what science is. Science is the unification of the forces of the universe. That's how we can understand them, and we can prove that we understand them. You can prove that you understand science, and you can prove that you understand something through science by showing evidence. Like, you can explain why rain functions the way that it does, or how the water cycle works, or the rock cycle, for example. Like, the science explains those behaviors. It's not an answer to that question. It's a provable, testable, repeatable explanation for that particular observable phenomenon. Because things that can be observed can be explained scientifically. Things that can be explained scientifically must also be observable. And that observation, there's a limiting factor of observation is things that are beyond our perception. Like, the orbit of Jupiter around the Earth is beyond human perception. We can't see Jupiter with the naked eye. We can augment our vision with tools of science and then go into a further explanation of principles. And that's kind of where we are with the whole quantum physics, quantum mechanics. We're trying to understand the information beyond our first level of observation. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. It has more biases added to it. That's pretty much the foundation of flat Earth. The flat earthers are doing science halfway. They're observing and they're testing, but they're not repeating. They're making observations about the world. They say, when I go outside and I look around, I see everything is flat. But that's it. They're not going beyond that, because they're validating their own, what they want to understand and what they want to prove. As soon as they run some test and it gives them the answer that they want, they say, Eureka, I have proven my point, But they don't try to retest it. They don't try to go beyond that, I actually had, I won't get into flat earth in this video, but the point of this video, 5 minutes in, and I haven't even explained this video, so this video is the My02cent standard model for the atom. So there's basically 3 different models off the top of my head. I can't remember them all. There's like the Plum model, the Rutherford model, I believe, and the Bohr's model. I think those are correct. I'll speed the video up. There's the Rutherford model, the Plum pudding model, and the Bohr's model. So the Plum pudding model was the first model of the atom, and it postulated that electrons were trapped inside of a positive medium, kind of like, I won't make the connection between the Plum pudding model and the Higgs field. I won't, because they're not even in the same ballpark. The Rutherford model kind of tried to repair the Plum pudding model by stating that the electrons were, the Plum pudding model kind of stipulated that the atom was this congealed like medium and the electrons were fixed inside of it. The Plum pudding model was the next model after that one was the Rutherford model. And the Rutherford model basically stated that the atom was a nucleus of positively charges, and around that nucleus was an equal amount of electrons. The problem with that model, which Niels Bohr's model fixed, and it's pretty much the foundation of why I started this video, is actually, I can honestly say that this one question pretty much drives all of the whole reason why I created My02cent to begin with. And the Rutherford model, the Niels Bohr model, it explained the fundamental crux or flaw, the most fundamental component of science in general, like all of science, the most fundamental component of all science that completely falls apart. There's one principle of science that we overlook every day that pretty much invalidates all scientific principles. The problem is that science is meant to describe the natural force of the universe. So even though we can't explain this one component of the natural force of the universe don't care. The universe is going to continue to do what it does, whether we understand it or not. This one fundamental principle is the idea that the proton is orbited by an electron, and yes, I will probably use the orbit. I will use the nomenclature of orbit and all of that stuff. I understand that the atom is a field and there's a cloud of probability and all that stuff. I know all of that. The problem is that when I'm communicating some understanding and I'm trying to help you visualize it, a two-dimensional charge around an atom would still be in orbit. It would be the same basic thing. If you think of the cloud, if you think of the electron cloud as a field around the atom at a circumference, which is a circumference, it's still a three-dimensional structure around the atom. It's still in orbit. The moon's path around the Earth is in orbit. If the moon wasn't fixed on one plane and it just orbited around the Earth in all three-dimensional axes, then it would still be a singular orbit. If the atom is considered one entity, if the electron is considered one entity, and that singular entity is occupying a finite volume that's greater than its volume, then it's orbiting in that volume, because it can't be in the entire volume at the same time. It's not omnipresent. It can move so fast that it can be perceived as being omnipresent inside of that finite volume, which is why they use the orbital cloud matrix to describe it. But the reality is that the electron is in a three-dimensional orbit. It orbits on all three axes around the atomic nucleus of an atom to create the valence shells. And those valence shells are shared with the other electrons. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the fundamental weakness of the atom, and there's lots of explanations now to try to justify it, but the fundamental weakness of the atom is that opposites attract. My first video was opposites repel, like electrons attract, where I was trying to explain that the law of attraction is inverse. It's inversely valid, that you can reverse it so that opposites can repel and like charges can attract. And in doing so, you can still show the principal forces of a law of attraction and repulsion, and the universe won't fall apart or anything. The reason why I primarily came up with that was because of this singular conflict. Protons and electrons are attracted to each other. If you take two magnets, I wish I had two magnets. If you take two magnets and you put them together, they collapse onto each other. They accelerate toward each other because of Coulomb's law. Coulomb's law and then Newton's law of gravitation, it dictates that as two objects get closer and closer to each other, closer and closer toward each other, the force of interaction between them goes up exponentially. That's what the inverse law implies. So that the distance between my hands here, the force between them, is equal to half the strength of this distance between the two, and it just continues in that way. Even though the mass of my hands don't change, the force interaction between them will change as they move closer to each other. It will increase. It will continuously go upward. So that means that an electron, which is a fixed mass, and a proton, which is the positron, the atomic nucleus, which is a positively charged volume of mass, and the electron, which is a negatively charged volume of mass, their force interactions are fixed. The amount of energy they have are fixed based on the number of them. So we'll just say hydrogen. So the one proton of hydrogen and the one electron, they have a fixed amount of energy that generates an interaction between them. As they move toward each other, the force between them increases exponentially as they get closer, and then it stops. There's a principle in quantum mechanics that just says that the electron never is observed as entering the atomic nucleus. Now, I will argue that the electron can enter the atomic nucleus and not be observed doing so. The problem is that quantum mechanics basically tells us that the system that is an atom never loses energy in this way. It never radiates energy to the point where basically the proton is pulling on the electron. The force of attraction of the proton pulling on the electron is never great enough to overcome the orbital mechanic that the electron has around the atomic nucleus. This is also relevant to the fact that an electron can be hit by a photon and leave the atomic nucleus. So if you have an atom, you have a proton with an electron on an orbit around it, and then a photon hits this electron and shoots it out of the atom, and then it's traveling through space, and it's on a collision course with another atom, it will just orbit it. For some reason, they just orbit. They never actually collide with the nucleus. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can look this up on the internet. You can go do all of the research you want, and there is no objective law to describe why electrons never collapse into the atomic nucleus of an atom if opposites attract. If opposites attract, we should see this all the time. So because of this, and because I like science and I love creating theories and theorems and theses and hypotheses, and I would really wish that I was in an area of the world where I could just do this stuff to make a living. Because of this, I created the My02cent standard law of the My02cent standard law. I'm sorry, the My02cent standard model. So I'm gonna read the basic principles, and I may put the actual atom on the screen. I don't know what I'm gonna do yet because I'm still figuring all this stuff out. Oh, I can do this. Okay, I can't do this. Okay, I got it. I had to plug in my mouse. So the My02cent standard model, I'm gonna just read it. The photon is a type of the photon is a type of elemental particle. It is the quantum of an electromagnetic field, including electromagnetic radiation such as light and radio waves, as a force carrier for the electromagnetic force. The tachyon is in the theory of quantum gravity. The tachyon is a type of elementary particle. It is the quantum of the monochromatic field, including monochromatic radiation such as tachyons and gravity waves, as a force carrier for the monochromatic force. Electron. The electron is a subatomic particle with an electric charge that is negative 1/4 elementary charge and a gravitational charge that is plus 1/4 elementary charge. The graviton. In the theory of quantum gravity, the graviton is a subatomic particle which is an electric with with an electric charge that is plus 1/4 elementary charge and a gravitational charge that is negative 1/4 elementary charge. The proton. The proton is a subatomic particle with an electric charge that is plus 1/4 elementary charge and a gravitational charge that is negative 1/4 elementary charge. The neutron. In the theory of quantum gravity, the neutron is a subatomic particle with an electric charge that is... Sorry, I got distracted by something. The neutron is a subatomic particle with an electric charge that is negative 1/4 elementary charge and a gravitational charge that is plus 1/4 elementary charge. Light. Light is the electromagnetic radiation within a certain portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. The word usually refers to the visible light, which is proportionate to the spectrum that can be perceived by the human eye. Monochrome. Monochrome is monochromatic radiation within a certain portion of the monochromatic spectrum. The word usually refers to visible monochrome, which is the portion of the spectrum that could be perceived by the human eye. The photoelectric effect. The photoelectric effect is the emission of electrons by other free carriers. When light hits a material, electrons emitted in this manner can be called photoelectrons. The tachyon gravitational effect. The tachyonic gravitational effect is the emission of gravitons or free carriers when monochrome hits a material. Gravitons emitted in this manner can be called tachyonic gravitons. Okay, so I'm probably going to definitely put... I don't have time to really master this stuff. So unfortunately, I waste a lot of time trying to organize myself. What I'm gonna do, or what I'm doing, is I'm opening up the model that I just created, so I can look at it. And I want to view you in full screen mode. Come on, Facebook. Options, enter full screen. Okay. So if I do any type of actual editing, I probably will. I'm gonna put it here. So so everything I just read, right? The photon is the force carrier for the electromagnetic field. Tachyon is force carrier for the monochromatic field. Photons are the light energy is photons. Tachyon is monochrome. Monochromatic is the gravitational spectrum. The graviton, as you can see in the gray, the graviton is the force carrier for gravity. The force carrier for the electromagnetic spectrum, this force carrier for electricity, is the electron. So all of our electronics work based on electrons. We are able to ionize materials, generate an electric charge, and use that charge to encode data and then interpret that information to create the field of electronics. If somehow we could liberate gravitons from the atom, then we could use the force of gravitation to do everything that we do with electricity using mass attraction. This is the foundation of the standard atomic model of My02cent. It implies that in orbit around every atom, there is also a stable orbit for the graviton force carrier. The graviton is the mass force carrier for gravitation. Gravity is caused by mass. Mass generates a force of attraction toward other mass. Every electromagnetic atom which exists in nature has a weak interaction for gravitation. Everything that has matter, everything that is matter has mass. That's a principle of the science. If it's physically observable, it has mass. Everything with mass is supposed to be influenced by gravitation, because that's the way that the science describes it. So photons are supposed to be influenced by gravitation. So I don't know why they don't. I mean, I guess they do, because they'll spiral into a black hole, but they're described as being massless. Well, maybe they should be described as being near massless. Maybe that would be a more accurate description. Being near massless and being massless is not the same thing. Pretty much all principles of the atom applies. Now, these numbers, this is a hypothesis. These numbers are not absolutely arbitrary. They were inspired by the fact that the atom is stable. And so I had to stabilize the atom. When I added the graviton to the atom already has mass, it already has the mass, it already has gravitation. So taking the total amount of mass that exists in the atom and saying this much of it, this proportion of it would be located here, doesn't break the atomic model. It does repair a lot of things. For example, if there's a graviton in orbit between the electron and the atom, between the electron and the atomic nucleus, that would explain why the electron is never viewed or seen falling into the atom, because the graviton is in the way. The graviton is physically occupying a space that reduces the likelihood of the electron actually hitting the atom, the atomic nucleus. Obviously, that would beg the question, how does a proton interact with the nucleus, or how do they shoot electrons through the atom? The question is great. The problem is that it doesn't really matter, because even without the graviton, all of the physics that we've already accepted still apply. Nothing's changed. You can fire beta particles through an atom, and they will interact with the atomic nucleus, but they will never be seen spiraling into the nucleus. The graviton is only meant to show evidence of why the electron never spirals into the atomic nucleus. It doesn't affect any of the other physical interactions that we've already have observed. The single most important component of the graviton is it explains anti-gravity. I'm working on, there's a lot of contradictions and figuring out how to explain something in a way that's elegant. Every time I think I have it figured out, there's a contradiction, and then as soon as there's a contradiction, the whole theorem falls apart. I'm currently working on a book. It's going to be called Inertial Gravimetics, or something on those lines, and it's basically going to explain anti-gravity theory in a very elegant way. Until I figure that out, all I can tell you is the graviton in the atomic nucleus is responsible for generating the force of gravitation. It is the carrier of mass, in the same way that electricity is a carrier of the electromagnetic force. And the same way that the electron orbiting around the atomic nucleus of an atom generates electromagnetism, the graviton orbiting around an atom also generates mass attraction. The only thing that I've changed that probably could affect the natural behavior of physics is that if you look at the atom, it's probably still right here. If you look at the atom, the neutron is no longer negatively charged. Zero charged electron. The neutron no longer has a net charge of 0. The neutron has a net electric charge of -1/4. The reason why is because there's a proton, a neutron, an electron. When there was 3 components to the atom, all their forces had to equal 1. Since there's a graviton, there's 4 components to the atom. So now all their forces have to still equal 1, which means the forces between them all are divided into 4. So now that you have 4 force carriers to define 1 charge, the neutron doesn't have to have a negative charge of 0 anymore, because the neutron is balanced out by the graviton. So the positively charged electromagnetic force of the graviton and the negatively charged electromagnetic force of the neutron balance each other out, reducing it down to zero. The electron and the proton, their electromagnetically charged, balance each other out to zero as well. The proton's mass charge is +1, and the neutron and the proton's mass charge is -1, and the electron's mass charge is +1. Those two together cancel each other out to zero. The graviton has a mass charge of -1/4, and the neutron has a mass charge of +1/4. So those two cancel each other out. But all 1/4 of those together combine to give you the total mass of the actual atom, the total mass attraction force. Because you have to remember, don't think of it as, we think of mass as a unit. Like we associate mass with weight because we've gotten used to that. So when I say the mass charge behaves the same way as an electromagnetic charge. So you have a attractive charge and a repulsive charge that are operating together. When a neutron the neutron has a positive charge, all the charges are equal to 1/4. So it's either going to be positive or negative. The neutron has a positive charge for mass and it has a negative charge for electricity. That means that the neutron behaves in exactly the same way as an electron. And the graviton has a positive charge for the electric force and it has a negative charge for its mass force. The reason why is because the graviton is modeled directly after the electron. So the behavior, the properties of the electron and the properties of the graviton are the same, so that the inertia gravimatics will behave the same. And what I mean by that is, if you take the electron away from an atom, you ionize it. If you take a graviton away from an atom, you mononize it. So now you're supposed to have 4 charges. So if you take away a graviton, now you have a plus, you're -1. You have 3/4 mass, right? I'm trying to figure out the most effective way to put it in an elegant way, because I'm like explaining something that's completely brand new that it also makes no sense because there's nothing that you can associate it with. So you have, this is what I do. So you have positive, you have negative. So you have two charges on this hand. You have two negative charges and 2 positive charges. It doesn't matter. You have 2 negative charges, you have 2 positive charges. If you eliminate one of the gravitons, you lose a negative charge, right? So what happens with the atom? The atom wants to balance itself. So what does it do? It would valence shell couple with another atom to gain an electron. That is the attractive mass force, right? Because when an so you have atoms, right? You have hydrogen and oxygen, right? Hydrogen bonds with oxygen because it has empty valence shells, right? So the hydrogen atoms combine with the oxygen atoms based on the valence shells interaction, right? The electrons in the hydrogen atom and the electrons in the oxygen atoms behave in a certain way, right? Since the graviton is modeled after the electron, then the gravitons will behave in a valence shell way with the oxygen and with the water between the hydrogen and oxygen atoms the same way to give you the same exact kind of valence shell interaction. So nothing will have to change. Everything will still be the same. And that's pretty much the foundation. Like, I don't really know where else to go with this part of this explanation. I just need comments in the comment section. I need people to say like, "Oh, that's stupid," and "I'm gonna dislike this video and I'm never gonna subscribe." Or I need people to say, "I get it, I understand it because of this," or "How come you didn't say that?" Without any actual activity in my My02cent feed, I can't do nothing. And I do know that most of the reason why no one comments because you guys just agree, but it makes it hard for me to figure out what I should say or do next. So if you could leave a comment, if you could say that was interesting for this reason. What about this? Or what about that? That would be amazing, because it would help me actually put together and more, it'll help me address questions that are relevant instead of just come off the top of my head with subjects that people probably aren't even interested in. And with that, I will end this video. As always, my name is Plum.